President Trump is calling it presidential harassment. Democrats are calling it their constitutional duty, telling the president this is his new reality. House Democrats, now armed with subpoena power, announcing more investigations into more of the president's business.
We will not surrender our constitutional responsibility for oversight. That would make us delinquent in our duties.
Right this very minute, the House Ways and Means Committee, now run by Democrats, is holding a hearing on new legislation to require all presidential candidates to release their tax returns. It's perceived as the opening salvo in that committee's plan to ultimately subpoena President Trump's tax returns, thus revealing whatever it is the president has been hiding for all these years. And President Trump, who's long been complaining about Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, now has even more investigations to complain about, tweeting today, quote, "The Dems and their committees are going, quote, nuts." A continuation of witch hunt. The president's gripes include the fact that the House Intelligence Committee just unveiled a new sweeping investigation into whether the president's business interests are influencing in any way his foreign policy decisions.
From an intelligence perspective, we need to make sure that the President of the United States is putting America first, not Russia or some other country.
The president also complaining about these investigative committees, quote, even stealing people who work at White House, unquote. That's an apparent reference to the House Intelligence Committee having hired officials with experience at the National Security Council, including during the Trump presidency, to help them with their oversight of the president. On top of all that, the House Judiciary Committee authorized a subpoena this morning for Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, prompting yet another standoff. As CNN's Abby Phillip now reports for us, this is just the beginning of this new era of congressional oversight.
Today and every day, let us pray for the future of our country. Let us pray for the courage to pursue justice and the wisdom to forge peace.
A prayer about pursuing justice and forging peace. Ironically, coming just hours after President Trump fired off a barrage of attacks against Democratic lawmakers who plan to investigate him. Trump tweeting, "Presidential harassment. It should never be allowed to happen again." House Speaker Nancy Pelosi not taking the bait.
I always think that whatever the president says about us, he's projecting his own unruliness. He's a projector, and that's what it's about.
Trump also claiming that Republicans never did this to President Obama, even though
she described Benghazi as a soft target.
Republicans did lead a probe into the Benghazi attacks during Obama's presidency that lasted more than 2 years. This as House Democrats announcing sweeping plans for public hearings with Trump cabinet officials and probe a laundry list of issues, including the separation of children from their families at the border. Democrats also not shying away from potentially crossing Trump's red line, his personal finances.
I think overwhelmingly the public wants to see the president's tax returns. And so they want to know the truth. They want to know the facts. And he has nothing to hide.
Pelosi ignoring the president's unusual warning during the State of the Union address.
If there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation. It just doesn't work that way.
The House Speaker today firing back.
We will not surrender our constitutional responsibility for oversight. That would make us delinquent in our duties.
And President Trump's contention in his tweet this morning that investigators are stealing staff from the White House for their investigations reflects the president's anger over some hires being made by Adam Schiff in that Intelligence Committee. Now, Adam Schiff responded to the president's tweets, telling reporters that it's not unusual for NSC staffers to be hired by the Intelligence Committee. And he added this, that maybe Trump should work on being a better employer. Now, it is not unusual for NSC staffers to go over to the Intelligence Committee. Even Devin Nunes, Adam Schiff's predecessor as chairman of that committee, hired an NSC staffer who worked in the Trump White House, Jake.
All right, Abby Phillip, thanks so much. And it's also true that the White House NSC just hired a senior Republican staffer from the House Intelligence Committee, so it does work that way. But Simone, let me start with this. One of the president's tweets today reads in part, "The Republicans never did this to President Obama. There would be no time left to run government." There were a lot of hearings by President Obama, but I suspect President Trump would differentiate. He'd say, Benghazi, Fast and Furious, those were IRS, those were hearings about the Obama administration. The Democrats are doing investigations into my finances, things that I did before I even took office. Is that fair?
I don't think it's fair, Jake. Look, I think the Democrats are doing their job. Congress Democrats are now in charge of the House of Representatives. They're in charge of the House of Representatives because the American people sent Democrats there to put a check on Donald Trump and to get things done. Part of that check is oversight. And so when we have not seen the tax returns from the president, when there are multiple people and individuals and things happening at the cabinet level, we could talk about Secretary Zink, we could talk about all these things that the Republicans, when they were in charge of Congress, they failed to exercise their oversight duties. And so now Democrats are picking up where the Republicans left off.
And isn't there a risk here of Democrats being perceived as being too partisan, going after him in terms of like his personal finances?
It plays into a narrative that he's trying to get something done and they're just stuck on the resistance mode. The problem is that the reason you didn't investigate Obama's tax returns, he released them. The reason that you don't have to investigate, his business interests and other presidents is because they put them in blind trusts. If you're going to do weird things are going to happen to you, and you can't just complain about that stuff.
David?
Look, there is a legitimate role for congressional oversight, clearly. It's abrogated on many occasions. I do think that that's legitimate oversight, responsibility they have. I do, though, think that, as Van points out, there's a definite, and you ask, right, there's a definite chance that the Democrats overplay this hand, and they're seen as being incredibly overly partisan and not trying to actually get anything done. People say, oh, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. No, they can't, actually. Right? The Congress can't walk and chew gum at the same time. They do one or two things at a time. And so when they're investigating, they're not legislating, and that's just a fact.
If the president wants them to move on, he can just release all this stuff and we can move on. So
listen, man, I think it's not just about his tax returns. There's going to be there's a fine line between legitimate oversight and harassment.
Who gets to decide, though, what is legitimate
The American
oversight?
public. The American public will decide.
Definitely not Donald Trump.
Welcome to the NFL. Elections have consequences, other cliches that apply. I think Democrats are within their rights to do oversight, obviously. And I think that he's within his rights to make the argument that this is a circus, which is the argument that he's going to continue to make. And it is a decision ultimately that will probably rest with the American people when it comes to the perception of this. And the perception of it is pretty important. But I think they're on solid ground with asking plenty of questions, as you say, about sort of unorthodox situations.
The president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has openly admitted, he said it to me on State of the Union, that the president's attempts to discredit Robert Mueller were part of a PR campaign. Take a listen.
It is for public opinion because eventually the decision here is going to be impeach, not impeach. Members of Congress, Democrat and Republican, are going to be informed a lot by their constituents. So our jury is as it should be, is the American people.
So it's kind of the similar thing that he's doing with these investigations in the House.
Absolutely, Jake. Every good communications person, every time Rudy Giuliani goes on television, goes like this. Because it's like, what are you saying? You're not supposed to be saying that. Yes, the president and his allies have been very clear that they are playing to not just the American people, but specifically to their base. And they are preparing for a situation to where public opinion will enter, and folks in the United States, in Congress and the Senate will be looking to what the constituents and what the opinion polls are saying. I frankly don't think that's a sound strategy.
Listen, I was a staffer through the Clinton impeachment in the Senate, and I will tell you the House was rabid about this. And it was, remember, House and Senate were both Republican at that time, and the House tried to jam it through, and when it got to the Senate, it was a completely different ball of wax because public opinion and perception, people in America had had enough. They said enough. They were up in arms enough. And at some point, that's going to happen in this case.
You really think
absolutely,
so?
Absolutely.
Is there, well, let me ask you, is there one of these committee hearings, whether it's Judiciary, House Intelligence, Ways and Means going after his tax returns, is there one that you think that offers more particular danger for President Trump than the other?
I know the tax returns one is exciting for people because it's this solid, concrete thing, but it also was it was dealt with during the election, so I'm not sure how much you get out of this. In the end, I think, and it may seem unfair to Democrats because Trump has sort of brought the chaos level up, and the American people are sort of like, okay, we're right here. And I think if it feels like Democrats are taking it up another level, they will pay a bit of a price for that.
What do you make of Eric Swalwell and others on the Intelligence Committee forwarding the transcripts of their interviews, closed-door transcripts, to Mueller, and saying, Swalwell said, basically, we think there are more people that Mueller can go after for perjury for lying before Congress?
Look, I worry that the very people that you are concerned about, that the Trump base won't accept the outcome if it feels that it's an unfair process. And so I think it's
Or just America.
well, listen, I think most Americans...
Not the Trump base. That's what we should be concerned about.
No, listen. I think most Americans feel something weird and screwy is going on with Donald Trump, and they want to know what it is. And I think I think that's quite fair because no president's ever acted this way.
But you should say most Americans. That's not a fair thing to say.
Do I get a chance to have my opinion?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So
I'm just disagreeing with you.
So look, I think most Americans will accept the outcome, whatever it is, and they'll judge it on the merits. There are going to be some Democrats who are going to be way off on one side, but I think but there is a concern that if you have a Trump base that's been primed to think this is unfair, and then there are acts on the part of Democrats that add to that narrative, that you could have people not accept the outcome, and and I think that's dangerous.